Can I get a mic or a mic and a half? That the source owe me. Shout out to the editor staff. Yeah, I'm all grown, so much better with math. I need a spread in the Forbes, taking a Benjamin bath. Yeah, I'm serving this track like Steffi Graf. Yeah, Roger Federer, there's no competitor.
Urban Tennis, Episode 5, When Jimmy Met Maria. Welcome back, everyone, to this edition of the Urban Tennis Podcast. I'm your host, like always, and I'll be joined by my co-host very shortly. Today, we are basically on the verge, or it has started, the U.S. Open Series, the Emirates U.S. Open Series. But we're going to be jumping back and forth from the continents. We'll be looking into Jimmy Connors and Maria Sharapova's union. We'll look into Roger Federer and what he's been up to post-Wimbledon. We're going to talk about that U.S. Open Series, which is in its 10th year now, the legacy of the U.S. Open Series. And then we'll talk about basically MLB's decision to put classic matches on YouTube and what tennis can do in that respect.
So, as you can tell, we are definitely baseball fans masquerading as tennis podcasters, if you could tell from the last podcast.
I agree. Okay, like always, let's get started. So, last week we found out some pretty surprising news when Maria Sharapova announced that she had hired 8-time Grand Slam champion and tennis legend Jimmy Connors to consult and coach her from this point forward. And it's something that the tennis world did not expect at all, but it's obviously a very different dynamic and something that's going to possibly, and I think probably, alter the landscape of women's tennis for the rest of this year and maybe the next couple of years, depending on how that collaboration goes.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Connors, at least according to Wikipedia, doesn't have a lot of coaching experience. His only experience that list is Andy Roddick from about 2006 to 2008. So it's still a fresh guy to bring in. He's not a guy with a lot of coaching experience, but it's hard to find a guy with more pedigree than Jimmy Connors, right?
No, definitely. He does have the pedigree, and I think it's going to be twofold. In the short term, I think it's just going to be maybe defining that mental game that Sharapova is such a grinder that she never really is out of a match, but then there's some points and then there's some service games where she can definitely be off and matches can slip away from her. And Jimmy Connors in his career was one of the most focused individuals, similar to Sharapova, much of a real grinder. So expect that real, that the focus to continue, and then I think the ultimate plan is just to find a way to defeat Serena Williams, something she hasn't done since 2004. So I think any new advice, new opinion she can get to work towards that will be beneficial. I don't see this as a long-term pairing, but in the short term, maybe for the next 18 months, it could be something like the Yvonne Lendl-Andy Murray partnership. But what do you think? What do you think are the immediate goals that Jimmy Connors has for Maria Sharapova?
Well, yeah, I mean, they may not say it explicitly, but implicitly, I think it's definitely to find a way to beat Serena Williams. I mean, Maria Sharapova at her best can beat anybody on the WTA Tour, except if Serena Williams is playing her best, which has prevented her from probably winning at least one or two more Grand Slams to her career, and something that we'll bring up later on.
Absolutely, and I think their first pairing will be in Toronto, and which we'll talk about in our next podcast in a couple weeks' time. Moving on, one person who really hasn't gone away from the tennis world since Wimbledon, when most players do. We've seen that Novak Djokovic has been on a tractor, Rafael Nadal has been playing video games, Andy Murray's been basking in his glory. Roger Federer has been tinkering and playing a couple of tournaments now post-Wimbledon, this week in his native Switzerland, where he received a cow as a gift. So that's something he did. But he's been tinkering around, adding these tournaments last minute. He's got a new racket, a little bigger. He had a sweater vest, which is completely different. But once again, inconsistent. Not really the Roger Federer we're used to. He lost to last week to Delbonis, a qualifier. So what do you think the modus operandi is for Roger Federer in this European vacation almost after post-Wimbledon?
Oh yeah, definitely like you said, Roger Federer I think he's looking at this time as R&D time. Like he wants to see which ways his game can change to adapt to different ways of playing, right? I mean, he's not going to be the guy, he never really was even at his best, the guy with a big serve, right? Or the guy with and now he's adapt to the fact that he's not going to be able to run the cross court like Andy Murray can at this point in his career. So he's going to have to find ways to adjust his game, work within those limits, and if he wants to have a chance to win the U.S. Open.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing we can get out of this is that new racket, that new Wilson racket he has. Many people have said that if he just go, because he does not change technology very often. Roger Federer has the type of racket. He's been playing with that for many years now, unlike the newer guys who are always experimenting. So this is a big gradual change that he hasn't had in a long time. So if he can, even get to a couple more shots with a bigger racket head, possibly the sweet spot's a little bigger. So, the half step he loses in his mobility may be made up just on the new racket. So I think that's going to be interesting. Really R&D is the key, and it's been weird. And something else weird, he just announced that he'll most likely play Brisbane, the Australian Open warm-up, something he hasn't done prior to the Australian Open in over 10 years. So Roger Federer is in R&D mode, just trying to, work on a couple of things. Like off the top of the show, we are now in the latter weeks of July, but also what we call here stateside, the Emirates U.S. Open Series. The 7-week lead up to the U.S. Open, where we have some of the biggest North American tennis tournaments. For the men, a couple of Masters tournaments. For the women, three, maybe 4 premier events. But the big chunk of tennis in North America happens right now. And part of that has been the U.S. Open Series for many years. Now in its 10th year, that additional motivation for these players. If they do well, they can get that bonus if they also win the U.S. Open. So to my co-host, now 10 years in to this, what are your big takeaways from how effective the U.S. Open Series has been to tennis stateside and to basically maintaining that level of play after Wimbledon?
Well, I think you're going to have to say it's been a mixed bag. I mean, in some respects, it's been a positive. We still see good, strong tournaments. Obviously, we see it in Toronto, Montreal, Cincinnati, and in Stanford, right? But New Haven. My mistake. Okay.
Stanford too. Definitely.
Oh, Stanford. Oh, no, sorry. I said Stanford, which is Connecticut. That was my mistake. I meant New Haven and Stanford. But we've also seen some tournaments recede. I mean, Indianapolis was a tournament for a long time, big network coverage on CBS, and we've seen it drop down to a lesser tournament in Atlanta now. And part of that reason could be that as fewer American players are in each draw playing at top levels, it's harder to bring the common sports fan out to see these players.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to notice that the strength of the women's tournaments, especially the ones in California and then Connecticut, are much stronger stateside than the men's are. The men's has already lost Memphis now, San Jose, like you said, Indianapolis. And it's kind of mirroring that the women's tennis, I guess youth women's tennis for the Americans is on the rise again. You have a lot of promising young athletes, while in the men's game you don't. And it's kind of interesting to see that how it mirrors the quality and the importance of the tournaments to the stateside. Are there any tweaks we can do with the U.S. Open Series? Is it the simple state of some years players are tired and they don't do as well, some years they aren't? Or is there something inherent in the system that we can change to make it more like some people argue European clay season, where there's a gradual build to the French Open?
That's tough. I mean, a lot of the reason people say it's tough to replicate what Europe does in North America is because just the sheer fact that a lot of players are fatiguing. They start to either they're injured, they're tired, and they can't keep up matches, or they have to they're forced to withdraw. So it's tough to keep a consistent feel like you see in Europe. So I think the only real changes they make is us continuing that close collaboration between tournaments. I mean, when I've been to like a US Open Series event, such as the Rogers Cup, I like the idea that the players I'm going to see here, this is their lead up to the US Open, which I know is obviously a massive tournament. So say if I'm going to a relatively small tournament in Atlanta, I want to know that these players are going to lead up to a big showing at the US Open.
Switching gears now, Major League Baseball has recently started posting classic games, moments, and other historical events in its entirety. And I'd like to, talk about the Grand Slams or the ATP and WTA either following suit, or are you, quite happy with the third-party users who end up putting up a significant amount of matches? Like, I've never had a problem finding a match from the last 25 years, but do you think it's in the future plans of the official slams and the WTA and ATP to put it on their own pages?
Well, I think it should be because they already have official channels that are constantly updating for the WTA and ATP. And yeah, it's true that a lot of fans can put up a match from the 2008 Classic between Federer and Nadal, right? But it may be tough if you want to look back and see like a 1975 match, right? With this MLB channel that they have, you can see a baseball game from 1952. So like, if you're really into tennis, I think ATP and WTA should get some stuff together and post these matches up there.
No, absolutely. And I think eventually some of them are going to have to do it. I've liked a lot of the content that the Grand Slams have put on, but they've really been focused on that year's Grand Slam. If they can ever just increase their library, you want to be the place to go online for videos, and I think eventually they will be that.
So I think the only solution can be to bring all these tournaments together and operate a channel just like Vivo did for music videos, where all these different labels came together and are posting videos on this one channel.
We're almost near the end of episode 5, but as always, we like to end with a game or two, and today we're going to do a little bit of tennis roulette, which is where we put either a country, a year, players into a bag, randomly draw. Today, we're going to draw a tennis year since the Open era, and just talk about the events, significance, and everything about it. So we drew this today. We drew 1993. So for my co-host, when you think of 1993 in tennis, what do you immediately think of?
Monica Seles.
I think that's pretty obvious. The 1993 will be defined by the incident when Monica Seles was stabbed by a deranged tennis spectator, and that basically in some way changed the course of tennis history. Monica Seles was definitely on the rise. You had the established Seles-Graf rivalry. Monica had won the Australian Open, and when the stabbing happened, she was unable to participate basically for the next 2 years. And in 93, the rest of the Grand Slams went to Steffi Graf, who had lost to Monica Seles in the Australian Open final. So I'm never going to say that Graf would never have won any of the following 3 tournaments, but 3 Grand Slams, but it did make her job a little easier. And what about the men's side? What do you take away from the men's side?
Pete Sampras. I mean, Pete Sampras was tied for the most wins in that year. He's leader on the money list, and of course he won 2 Grand Slams. And so he won I think it's not too common when this happens, winning a Wimbledon and the US Open. So it was a good year for Pete Sampras, obviously, and he carried that momentum on for a few years after that to get to 14.
I think so, and I think you'll remember the 93 Wimbledon final against Ivanisevic. It was one of the better and more closely contested finals that Sampras has ever been in. And when you look back now 20 years later, that these two men were probably the best of their era on grass. And is a really, I wouldn't say tight, but interesting 5-setter that happened. Okay, so we're almost on to our social media highlight of the week. The Urban Tennis Podcast always likes to add in what's happening out there. And this week, obviously Maria Sharapova and Jimmy Connors were in the headlines, and that's where we take our highlight from. So basically, Maria Sharapova tweeted, kind of annoying that he has 4 more Grand Slams than me. Happy face. And then she posted a picture of her practicing with Jimmy Connors in the background. So you like to see that spirit, and like that, maybe that mini rivalry has already begun, where Maria Sharapova tries to get her 5th Grand Slam. Thanks for listening. You can read Urban Tennis on urbantennis.wordpress.com. You can connect on Pinterest at Urban Tennis. And like always, if you like what we're talking about, or if you have any questions, you can comment below on either the SoundCloud interface, YouTube, or on the blog itself. Thanks for watching episode 5, When Jimmy Met Maria.
It had to be you. It had to be you. I wandered around and finally found the somebody who could make me be true.